So next up, podcast listeners, we have resetting cash. This is actually a very interesting segment, resetting cash, because there's this trend in the United States and across the actual democracies and modern economies, modern economies, where the economies and the leadership want to get rid of cash. They want you to use only a digital wallet. They want you to only use digital cash. I'm not talking about crypto, okay? I'm just talking about converting dollars to a digital wallet, which, by the way, is huge with millennials, Chris. But get this. There are a lot of problems, as we've talked about before, with the idea of having a digital wallet. Namely, that the money could just disappear if it's digital, okay? What if the government became authoritarian, which, some might argue has already happened, and the government decides that anyone with a gun needs to turn in their gun or we're going to wipe out your digital wallet. Well, you know what they can't wipe out? They can't wipe out your actual cash, okay? Could they wipe out the cash that you have in the bank? Yes, they could. I'm talking about, though, cash that you actually have in your safe or at home or in your business or in your cash register or wherever you put it and hide it. And why does this matter? This matters because recently, and this is reported in a number of newspapers, including the Epoch Times, a woman was hospitalized with an accidental overdose after picking up a $1 bill in Tennessee. So a Kentucky woman said she ended up in the hospital with an accidental overdose after she picked up a simple $1 bill on the ground. Quote, "My body went completely numb. I could barely talk and I could barely breathe," Renee Parsons wrote on Facebook, claiming she actually overdosed. Parsons' family was traveling to a Dallas area conference when she stopped at McDonald's in Bellevue, Tennessee. Renee then spotted a dollar bill on the ground and attempted to collect it. I mean, you and I would probably do the same. Her husband, Justin Parsons, told the local media the story. "I see a dollar bill on the ground, thinking absolutely nothing of it, picked it up," Renee wrote on Facebook. Then, within minutes, her body went numb and she could barely move or breathe. It's almost like a burning sensation, if you will, that starts here at your shoulders and then goes down because it's almost like it's numbing your entire body, she said. Justin told local news station 2 that she looked like she was dying and she was certainly as very unconscious and pale as you can imagine. After she was taken to a nearby hospital, staff treated her for an accidental drug overdose before she was released 4 hours later. The couple told local outlets that her toxicology report did not test positive for synthetic drugs, but they said they're confident the dollar bill contained fentanyl or another powerful drug that could not be identified. However, the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department said that they did not find traces of synthetic drugs on the dollar bill, but they destroyed it anyway, according to local media. Dr. Rebecca Donald, an assistant professor of anesthesiology and pain medicine at Vanderbilt University, told WSMV-TV that it was not likely fentanyl. It is much more likely for her to have a reaction if she had inadvertently rubbed her nose and exposed that drug to some of the blood vessels in her nose or licked her fingers or rubbed her eyes, she said. Dr. David Edwards, another Vanderbilt doctor, told News 19 that simply touching most drugs cannot cause an overdose. Interesting. I have not. I've heard the opposite. Ingesting something is a different story than touching something. So in June, the Perry County Sheriff's Office issued a warning after fentanyl-laced cash was found at 2 different gas stations in Tennessee. So it's interesting. You have some doctors that they've interviewed that's saying, "Oh, no, that can't happen." But meanwhile, when you talk to the police officers, they're like, "Yeah, it happens and is happening." And so, ladies and gentlemen, here is where we're going with this. The United States government is allowing people to illegally cross the border, and they're clearly illegally crossing the border with fentanyl and all other kinds of drugs. And we have a porous border, and we have all these different drugs coming through, including the most dangerous, such as fentanyl. And then suddenly, We have people dropping dead left and right from these drugs. And then the next thing we know, a dollar bill has fentanyl on it and could potentially kill you. I mean, think about it for a moment. Let's just say the dollar bill was loaded with fentanyl, or a dollar bill was loaded with fentanyl. You saw it on the ground, you picked it up, and you do what we all do. You probably looked at it and rolled it out completely and said, wow, that's a real dollar bill, and I'm going to put it in my wallet. So you put it in your wallet. You now have the fentanyl all over your fingertips, and at some point that day, you're probably going to eat, or you might sneeze, or you might rub your nose. And now you have fentanyl in your body, which my understanding is could be sufficient enough to kill you. Well, our federal government has enabled this nonsense to happen. And because they've allowed the fentanyl to come across the border. But what if, and I put this out there, and this is, I will grant you, this is kind of far out there. What if there are people across the planet, like the Chinese government, the communists, and maybe Cuba, and maybe Venezuela, maybe North Korea, that are trying to undermine the United States currency and the use of it? What if? Well, then you suddenly have this issue of people being terrified of using dollar bills or $20 bills or any kind of paper currency because it has been laced with fentanyl in certain parts of the country. And maybe that could even be expanded by these criminals and by these foreign criminals as well. Ladies and gentlemen, this is entirely possible. Okay? It's entirely possible. So then you might say to yourself, well, what benefit would this be to the Chinese? Very easily. It's a very easy benefit because the dollar is the world's currency. People across the planet in the most far-ranging places of the planet use dollar bills, use American currency to pay for things because it's a hard currency. What if suddenly everybody was afraid to use it because they had heard stories across the planet of people dropping dead because they touched the dollar bills, which could have been laced with fentanyl or something even worse? Well, then that would give the United States government the justification to implement a completely and thorough digital currency. And what could go wrong, ladies and gentlemen, with a digital currency? Well, pretty much everything can go wrong with a digital currency. For example, we gave the earlier example, of course, about the fact that government could just wipe out your account. The bank could wipe out your account. Has anyone out there in podcast land had their checking account frozen? Okay. A checking account can be frozen in the United States if someone puts a lien on your account because, let's say, you didn't pay a bill and they got a judgment against you. In many cases, that could have happened because you simply didn't have the money to pay the bill. And suddenly, your account is frozen, which means you can't use your money. Yes, you owed money to someone. I get it, right? I get it. But if that happened to you before, or if you can imagine that happening to you, then I will say this. You feel powerless because now you realize you can't buy anything. Have you ever had someone compromise your credit card and you're away on vacation and suddenly you can't use any of your credit cards? And you're like, well, what am I supposed to use now? I don't have enough cash on me. I've got like $100, but that's not going to get me very far for very long. Well, all of those examples that I just gave are identical to digital cash because digital cash, where you have a digital wallet and that digital wallet is controlled by the federal government, because obviously it would be, it can be easily wiped out and taken away. Just like a credit card can be compromised and suddenly made useless. Exactly like that. And just like you never thought that you'd have a federal government that would tell you that the age of the Enlightenment is over and that men can be women and women can be men and that men can have babies, that's the same government that, believe you me, can take away your digital cash if you don't basically get on your knees and ask for forgiveness to that federal government. And that's why I'm so concerned about this trend and in the Epoch Times article, namely that we have governments that are across the planet who want to displace the dollar bill and the American currency as the default currency and the hard currency on the planet. And one way of doing that is to lace it with fentanyl and to make it dangerous to use the currency and dangerous to exchange the currency. And then we also have a willing administration, namely the Biden administration, who would be more than happy to control every aspect of your life by making you have digital currency. And I don't know about you guys, but I enjoy having a few dollars in my pocket. You know, it's in my wallet, I guess. Yes, I've got a couple of credit cards naturally, and I'm just like many people who pay for things with credit cards predominantly because you get the points and all that stuff, and that makes sense. But there is something very empowering about having cash. Because if you ever notice, people tend to jump more at cash, especially when you are paying people. I know in case of my family, if you if you give a niece or a nephew cash, like it's really kind of interesting. So I have nieces and nephews, and over the years, traditionally we would give just a check, right? For a birthday or for Christmas or something like that. If it was a really special occasion, like a high school graduation, as an example, we would give like $100, okay? And we would write a check. And a couple of times we simply forgot to write the check in time after we left the house. And we're like, oh man, I hope we have enough cash. And my wife has a tendency of carrying more cash than me. I think she just always has. And so we put a $100 bill inside the card as opposed to a check for $100. And you should have seen the difference. It was like we gave them $500 because it's like, yeah, that check thing is one extra thing I got to take care of. But the cash is like instant. It's something that you can use today. It's transferable this second anywhere. Anyone will accept it. So why would the government want to get rid of it? And we've briefly touched on this subject before, but what has changed between that last conversation and today's is the idea that a simple terrorist event or a simple accidental event by allowing these idiots with fentanyl to come across the border, okay? I'm talking about the drug smugglers to come across the borders of the United States with fentanyl and other drugs and lacing our currency and making it impossible for us to use our own currency in our own country. And then the government says, well, we're going to sign an executive order, and it's an emergency order where you have to digitize all of your cash from this point forward. And if you don't turn in all of your cash effectively by Friday, and you turn it into the bank, who will then turn it into digital cash, if you don't do that, then the cash will become worthless because we are having an emergency where people are using cash and touching it and dying from fentanyl overdoses. Do you think that that's not possible? Of course it's possible. Of course it is. And I'm sure you're probably saying, oh, well, Mark, I have total confidence in the federal government to make sure that the system is fair and no one can, the government will always leave you alone. Well, how about if someone hacks it? How about that? Right? if they're smart enough to kill our cash economy with fentanyl, aren't these same people smart enough to start hacking your digital wallet? I mean, couldn't that happen as well? Isn't that the whole point of having cash as a backstop to the digital wallet being messed up or to the banking system breaking down or collapsing or something? Who knows? So this is an important story for all of those reasons. And it's interesting how so many stories like this are just buried and they're like, yeah, it's just a one and done incident. But don't you think for 1 minute that people in the Mexican cartels and in China, the CCP and others are looking at us going, if we could figure out a way of putting fentanyl on American dollars as they find their way across the planet and people start dropping dead, they're going to stop using American dollars. Pretty simple, huh? Pretty interesting. And we could literally destroy the United States economy in the process, but more importantly to them, they could destroy our freedoms. And there's nothing more free than having cash in your wallet because it is recognizable and people jump at that cash much faster than they jump at credit cards or checks, because with credit cards, they have to pay a fee when they accept the credit card. Usually it's like 1% to 3%. I'm talking about the merchant, right? So if I'm a merchant, put yourself in this situation, Chris. Here we go. We got Chris here. So Chris, if you have a store and the store sells shoes, okay? You have a high-end shoe store. You own the store and you accept all of the credit cards. Most, like 90% of the people come in and they pay using a credit card. You have to pay the credit card company a percentage of that sale for the luxury and benefit of using their credit card system. So that comes right off of the top. It's 1% to 3%. It might even be more. I'm not really certain at the moment. Depends on your volume. Maybe you can negotiate a better deal, but it's not going to be less than 1%. Probably much more like 3%. It's your store. You're the guy at the register like 90% of the time. Then someone comes in and they hand you a $100 bill or $200 bills, two $100 bills. Which one's more attractive to the store owner?
The cash.
The cash. The cash. Exactly. And cash is used even more widely by those who are the least among us, the poor, because they don't have bank accounts, because they don't have digital wallets. They buy everything with cash. And so this would literally collapse our economy, ladies and gentlemen. And we cannot afford for that to happen. So I'm just hoping that someone is watching this and taking this really seriously in the Biden administration. But then again, it is the Biden administration that's allowing all the fentanyl to cross the border with all of these folks who are illegally coming across the border. It is the Biden administration that is letting people out on basically no bail or a little bit of bail. I mean, it's just like a revolving door when they get arrested for these kinds of drug crimes and worse. And so what is the teaching moment then? Why wouldn't the rest of the world try to supplant us? Because that doesn't make us stronger. Makes us so much weaker.